Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Lord of the Flies, episode 1. It's called Piggy. And I guess I'll kind of start spoiler free, although it's not exactly a new story in the sense. But this is a Patreon sponsor review anyway, not to bury the Patreon. But thanks to Alison for making the choice. So yeah, this is a 4-part limited series which has different. I think it was on the BBC in the UK, but I think it's on Netflix in the US and wherever else. But it's an adaptation of the classic story, which I've never actually seen or read any version of. I don't think I'm vaguely aware of what Lord of the Flies is, but I've never actually went through the story in any form before. Although what's funny is watching this was just how much it kept making me think of Lost as I was watching it. It makes a lot of sense to me that Lost followed a couple of beats that this also kind of follows, at least based on this first episode. It was hard not to think of it, especially right at the start, as like the main kid's waking up, and it's very much like Jack waking up at the start of Lost. But obviously, Lord of the Flies came first, so I am not accusing of anything. I'm simply saying that that's what my mind was going to a lot as I was watching this. I also wished I was watching Lost a lot of the time as I was watching this, which is, to not belabor the point too much, I really did not like sitting through this episode. It's a combination of things, I think, but one is a show that's entirely children. Like I don't think that's necessarily something that wouldn't work or annoy me, but these kids definitely annoyed me. They definitely irritated me. It's a lot of young English children who are, some of them are more antagonistic, some are more innocent and smart, some are more, whatever. There's varying spectrum of personalities here. But there's nothing likable about almost any of them, and that probably feeds into what's going to happen into the story, but it wasn't that pleasurable to watch. But honestly, the big thing that was really bugging me as I was watching this, and this is more of a technical thing, is I hated how this show looks. This show uses heavy distortion on its lenses, and whether or not they filmed it that way with actual lenses or they added it in post after the fact, every shot, some stronger than others, but every single shot in this show, in this first episode, has heavy distortion and blurring around the edges of the frame. And sometimes it feels like everything but the person in the middle of the image is blurry, to the point of just absurdity, where I found it very unpleasant to look at, and I did not like watching it because of that. I actively thought it looked ugly pretty much the entire time, and it's a shame because they seem to be shooting on location in a nice tropical place, and they've got all these nice vistas in the background. But even in the wide shots, when it's like, hey, let's get a nice sample of like where they are, typically movies and TV shows will use this type of thing sparingly. They'll use it for maybe just a particular scene after a character's been hit in the head or something like that, and you'll have this kind of effect for a little bit, and it's there to kind of show that they're not really seeing their surroundings or that they're a little bit out of it. And that's fine, that works. That's a fair way to use it. But it's definitely something that's used, in reserve. It's something that's used a bit here or there for specific effects. And I'm sure there's a creative reason why they've chosen to do it for this show in every single shot, but I don't like it. Honestly, the thing it made me think of more than anything was, oh god, what were those movies called? Rebel Moon, the Zack Snyder movies, because they had this awful thing where everything was blurry in most of the image except whoever the actor was on screen. And it's this weird thing where even when I'm almost 100% sure they're shooting on a location with a real background behind them, it still looks kind of fake almost because of this just constant blurring of everything that isn't the person. And I found it very frustrating to watch. I thought this was ugly as shit. So I did not enjoy this on a technical level at all. And the story is like, it's kind of okay. Like, obviously it's a classic story, but I wasn't really enjoying the characters all that much. You know, so much of this first episode is the main character of Piggy, which isn't his real name, but it's what he's called in IMDb, so I'm just going to go with it. But Nicky's his real name, but Piggy's what he's called. And the fact that he reveals that was his like sort of like bully name to, you know, was it Ralphie? And Ralphie kind of betrays him by telling everyone else that he's called Piggy. Is kind of a plot point, but I guess I'm in spoilers, by the way. Spoilers for the first episode of Lord of the Flies. I'm not holding back, apparently. Not there's a lot of honestly, other than the ending, there's not a ton of spoil here. Not a lot happens, I guess, is maybe a complaint I would also say. Like, I like the initial survival stuff of, like, you know, someone, you know, take Lost or take anything where a group of characters end up in a situation where they're stranded or they're in a post-apocalyptic future or something like that, and they have to, like, figure out the basics, right? They have to be like, okay, well, we have to survive, so we have to, you know, maybe have shelter, we need to have a source of water, we need to have maybe some food, and it does technically go through those beats, but it's almost like a little frustrating the way, because it is a bunch of children, and you've really just got Piggy, who seems to be the one who mostly has the right ideas. And he's not, like, sure about a lot of them. He's a little bit unclear, which is, again, like, I get why he wouldn't be that confident. He is, after all, a young kid. But no one is that sure of anything except the people who are definitely wrong about things. And that's obviously a point of conflict, right? Our antagonist is a character named Jack, who leads the choir who were on the plane with the kids. And the way this group is introduced, because they do the whole thing at the start where it's just Piggy and he runs into Ralph and they find some fruit, or he finds fruit first, then he finds Ralph, and they find the conch shell, which you can use to kind of make a noise to summon people, blow it like a horn, and they end up on the beach and they end up like having all the other stragglers come out and they form a big group. After a little bit, though, they introduce the choir, who storm into the scene like they're military, like they are. Like, I don't know, it's such an interesting choice, but it's not just that, though. Before they march in, it gets kind of almost dreamlike, where we get close-ups of a bunch of their faces, and the camera's going over the water, and I wasn't sure what it was doing. I was like, wait, are we doing some artsy stuff here? Like, what's happening? And yeah, I mean, a lot of the runtime of this episode is like, you know, when it transitions between scenes, especially, it won't just do a quick transition or one, like, you know, because often you'll get like one little fill-in shot of like something in the environment before it cuts to a new scene, and that's on a lot of TV shows. That's a normal thing to do. This will do like a montage in between scenes of like wildlife and stuff on the island, and there's some interesting things they show. Like there's like various like rock formations and moss that almost look like creatures of some kind that kind of stuck out as being visually kind of distinct. But yeah, the introduction of this choir, they go for this really weird, like, big swing of an artistic thing where they almost pauses so we can do all these close-ups of faces before they actually walk into the scene. It was very strange. And immediately Jack, the head of the choir, wants to be the leader. And they're already talking about voting for what was the rank they used? Was it governor? That wasn't governor. That was chief. They're going to vote for a chief. And it ends up being Ralph who gets voted for as chief. And that's fine, whatever. Jack's like, well, I'll lead up my team, who are the hunters. We're almost like a separate entity. So, and that leads to some things later on where Jack actually corners a little pig and kind of freezes up and can't kill it, so it gets away, and then he masks his insecurities by blaming Piggy for not cornering the pig. All of a sudden it's his fault, and as soon as Piggy calls him on any of this, he's like, take it back, and he gets very threatening, he gets in his face, and it's like, okay, obviously what we're doing here is we're using the microcosm of this little community that is formed out of kids to tell stories about bigger ideas, of how hierarchies form, of how backstabbing happens, of how egos get in the way and foolhardiness gets in the way of actually accomplishing stuff, and no one's listening to the person who actually has some knowledge or ideas. Right? Get what it's doing. That's all fine and well, but I just didn't really like watching the kid be all intimidating and menacing. Like, there's something about this where I actually would just prefer it with adults who were better actors, who were a bit more subtly written, it's a little bit too on the nose with all the things it's doing for me, and that kind of was feeding into everything as well as I was watching the episode. There was numerous points in this episode where I had to like go back like a minute because I would zone out. I would zone out because I would sort of lose interest and I'd be kind of looking around the room a little bit. And then I'd be like, oh shit, I missed like the last minute of dialogue. I need to go back and hear what they said. And I would go back and I'd like go through it again. I'd be like, okay, all right, I've taken this bit in. Here's what we've got going. The other big thing Jack does, aside from his part in the ending with the fire, is they find the pilot dead in the trees. And again, this was something that made me think I lost quite a bit. But Jack immediately was like, well, you know, he must have been a bad pilot because otherwise this crash wouldn't have happened. So he doesn't deserve a Christian burial. We're going to, you know, just toss him off the edge of the cliff. It'll be like a Navy burial. And they just kind of throw him off the edge. And honestly, it's probably the best moment of the entire episode just because of how weirdly dark it is seeing this corpse fall off the cliff into the water. Piggy's disputing and like trying to protest this the entire time though. He's saying, no, this is awful, let's not do this. This is bad. And no one's going to listen to him, even though he's the one who's trying to actually speak with reason. Which, you know, is frustrating. And it's supposed to be frustrating. I'm not critiquing that for feeling that way. But I also... He's also not that compelling a character to get behind and root for. Like, when I'm thinking of examples like this, and Lost is the obvious comparison, but the other thing I would think of is The Mist. Right? The Mist is this movie, and it's based on a Stephen King story, where they get trapped in a supermarket because this mist rolls into town full of monsters, so they're basically trapped in the supermarket. And the supermarket, in that sense, is the island that this is. So you have these factions that kind of form, and you have main character who have sensible ideas. And slowly, over the course of the story, other characters start getting more extreme opposite ideas and start listening to people with, you know, more problematic ideas and sort of the cult of personality forming, which is sort of thing that I can see happening maybe with Jack in this. He already has a cult. He walks in with them. They're all matching clothes and they've got a uniform and everything. It's weird. All right, they storm in like they're marching into France, getting ready to occupy it. So, in those cases, like I can quite enjoy what's happening because the characters that I'm following are very confident and competent, and I'm enjoying them trying to fight back the tide of the negative stuff that's coming, even if it does feel a little bit doomed, because it makes me root for them to try and figure a way out of it. Whereas Piggy, like, there's almost like, it just feels kind of like, oh, he's never going to win or change a mind here. They're all kids. And I never found him trying to argue his point all that interesting. And when it gets to the scene where Jack gets all intimidating and he's like, take that back, you call me a liar, you said I lost my nerve, because he doesn't say it as an insult. Piggy just says, oh, it's not a big deal, you lost your nerve, there'll be another pig. Right? He doesn't say it to insult him. He just says it as because that's what he saw. That's what happened. And Jack's ego can't take it, and he's like, I would take that back, and he gets all threatening. At this point in the episode, I was almost frustrated that Piggy didn't see that coming, given how Jack has been acting and talking about stuff and lying about stuff throughout the episode. It was almost a little bit annoying that he was so taken aback and like, whoa, this is how you're reacting to this? And again, you can sort of like say that that's because they're kids and he's learning a bit slower. He's catching on to these personality types maybe a little bit slower than you would with an adult, and that's makes sense. That's arguably very more realistic, but it doesn't necessarily make it compelling for me to watch. It's the thing. Again, maybe if I liked how the show looked, maybe if I liked the atmosphere more, I would be into it. But even when it starts to try and suggest there's something else, like a couple of kids hear a noise and they're like, what's that? I don't know, it's coming from the trees. And there's this intense close-up in one boy just staring into the trees in the forest. And it lingers on his face for a while, just so we can see his blue eyes just kind of look around. As if there's something that he might catch or see, in the distance. And then eventually the little kid with the birthmark says, oh, there's a beast. I saw the beast and it's going to come back and get us. And again, made me think of Lost, bizarrely. I didn't realize Lord of the Flies had rumors of a beast. Is there actually a beast? I don't know. I would guess maybe not. And it seems like this is just like a superstitious thing where the kids have, the little kids are especially at the age where they would just be scared of monsters under their beds and stuff. So it feels like a natural knock-on effect to that to me. But yeah, it's like, oh, is there a beast coming? Oh, we have to kind of worry about that. So yeah, it, I'm trying to think, find some ways to kind of be at least a little bit eloquent as to say why I wasn't really feeling this all that much. And I don't even know if it's necessarily that, like, maybe just the concept of Lord of the Flies, in its original form, right? Not that this is the original form, but you know what I mean? Like, in its form where it's not been kind of shifted into something else with other types of character or a different type of situation, but kind of based loosely on the idea of it. In its original form, maybe it just doesn't work for me that well, or maybe it's just a case of, like, it just needs some vastly different characters and writing to make me get into it. But I get maybe that stuff I could get over if I was like so into the visuals and stuff, but the fact that stuff is actively like annoying me, it's making it very, very difficult to get really roped into caring about what's happening, to the point where the big tragedy at the end of the episode, which is the characters, there's a couple of montages of people collecting wood and stuff. Piggy does bond with one of the other kids because they sing a song together, and that's whatever. But the whole thing is they collect a bunch of wood, and Piggy says, "Oh, that's maybe too much wood. It's too big of a pile, and also it's rotten. This might not be quite right." And then someone goes, "Okay, has anyone got any matches?" And of course, it's a bunch of young kids and even younger kids. No one's got any matches. Well, does anyone have any flint? And then Jack gets the idea to use Piggy's glasses, and Piggy begs and protests because he needs them because he can't see without them, and Jack, just being kind of the bully that he is, just takes them. Now Ralph does take them off of Jack and still uses it to start the fire, and gives them back to Piggy afterwards, but maybe actually saying out loud, "Hey, don't worry, I'll give you these back after, but this is kind of an idea to start the fire." They're going to use it kind of like a magnifying glass to heat up the straw and get the fire going. And then the tragedy is that the fire is too big, it spreads to a tree, and then it spreads beyond that, right? It becomes a wildfire, and half the island's on fire, and the only reason why it doesn't seem to go to the other half of the island is because there just happens to be some rocks and cliffs in the way that separates some of the trees and the foliage and whatnot. And this is supposed to obviously be a big dark ending to the episode. It's a tragedy, especially once after some running away from the fire, and there's a lot of like fire in the background effects as Piggy's running around, and he eventually hits his head, but when he gets up, they realize that a lot of the other kids have went unconscious because of the smoke, and they're trying to find everyone. Him and Ralph are trying to find everyone on the beach. Piggy realizes that the one with the birthmark who warned about the beast is one that he knows is definitely missing, and it seems like the ending implies that, yeah, he's definitely gone and will not be back, that he's died in the fire somehow. And we sort of end on the conch shell, kind of like he uses it to try and help people out of the woods again, but the final moment's him holding it against his heart and he's breathing, and it's kind of like the sound is sort of echoing through the conch shell, and there's like the sound of waves and whatever. So obviously this is a dark ending, right? It's a tragic ending, and I'm not saying it isn't, right? I'm not saying I found the final moment anything else than that. Like, I don't know if it hit me that hard, but definitely that's what it was. However, I will say that the start of the tragedy, where the fire is going to spread and then keep spreading to the tree, and they're like, "Oh no, what do we do?" I found that darkly funny. It felt like a comedy of errors to me, especially since you've got like Jack saying, "Oh, it'll be fine, it won't spread any further than that." Like, he's so confident, and I'm like, Jesus, this is like everyone who just like, this is like denying climate change in a nutshell. Is just Jack being like, no, the fire won't spread any further than that, we'll be fine. 30 seconds later, half the island's ablaze. Like, again, you can see the microcosm representing a lot of real world bigger things in this little community of boys that is taking shape. But maybe on some level, watching a bunch of young English boys with no other types of character is just inherently a bit of a problem for me, because I just cannot. I mean, I'm just saying they're English because they all have that accent, more or less. It's not specifically because they're English. Like, if it was all Scottish boys, I'd probably be just as annoyed, if not more annoyed. But like, yeah, I don't know. I found it a bit of a tedious watch. If I'm honest, it's like 56 minutes this episode, and I was there was just sections in between the major plot points, and I've brought up most of the major plot points, but there's these sections in between those plot points where it is just, walking through the trees, maybe there's a little bit of like character development of getting to know someone, but it's almost like there's just this inevitable quality, like right at the start when Piggy meets Ralph, and Ralph, one, he's scared to get in the water, right, because he can't swim, but he eventually takes his shoes and socks off so he can walk in it a little bit, and maybe lightens up just a touch, right? So it's showing you some character. There's nothing wrong with that. That's like solid like character introduction stuff. But immediately, he's like, hey, what's your name? And instead of just giving him his real name, which he gives him later on when he specifically asks for his real name, he says, well, I don't want to tell you because people call me something bad. And he's like, oh, I won't call you that. I'll promise. And he says Piggy, and he laughs a little bit. He says, well, it is a funny name. But he's like, hey, don't tell anyone, promise. And it's like, yeah, sure. As soon as he says that he's going to, right? And it's, I don't know, like part of me was just a little bit kind of like, well, I'm just waiting for that to happen now. And luckily it doesn't take that long for him to betray that promise, but it just kind of felt like, oh, now I need to wait for that to happen so we can get to this next bit of the plot where Piggy's felt betrayed, and we can keep having Piggy feel betrayed or feel bad or threatened over and over throughout the episode, and just wallow in the misery. Now, one might think that I might enjoy children being miserable, and there's a reasonable, expectation there, depending on the context. But yeah, not so much here. Not so much here. And certainly, like, I wasn't really latching onto the characters, and inherently, the ones that aren't Piggy are not meant to be that likable. Jack's not that likable straight up. He is the villain of the group, essentially. And Ralph, while he seems nice, and seems nicer at least than the others because of the way he treats Piggy, he also, at multiple points, kind of goes back on his word or doesn't back him up, or like he'll be nice to Piggy when it's just them, but when they're in the group and everyone wants something, he'll just kind of not side with them. So his backbone ain't that hot. And there's also this kind of shared delusion of like, oh yeah, the forest fire will make the adults come, they'll come and rescue us, and like, oh, the Queen's got a map of every place on her toilet, and my dad's in the Navy, he's going to come and find us, yada yada yada. And I don't know, I guess I just found all of the actual conversations a little bit tedious to get through, because it's almost like I know they're not going to accomplish what they think they're going to accomplish. And yeah, I guess it's one of those things where I guess in this situation I would much rather characters who were just a bit more capable, so I could actually enjoy the problem solving part of it. As funny as it is that they end up burning half the island when they try to do a fire. It's like this is the opposite of Tom Hanks in Castaway. This is like, this is like the equivalent of like setting off a nuclear bomb compared to like Tom Hanks trying to get one little fire going in Castaway. But yeah, and it makes sense they screw it up. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have screwed it up. Like, they are kids. None of them are trained for this. None of them know what to do. They have vague ideas at best. Hell, I've got vague ideas at best. But yeah, I don't know. I found this to be unpleasant. And I felt every minute of those 56 minutes. I really did. And I think the ending's, meant to be this poignant kind of bitter, like, you really feel it, though, that one of the kids has died. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay, I guess. I'm just not feeling it. And it's, yeah, I need someone to at least get behind a little bit. And I just don't think Piggy's that character, right? He's too aloof in his own skills to really be a character that I can sort of follow and root for. And then you combine that with all of the visual stuff that I flat out dislike. And I'm not like expecting an actual beast to show up, so it's not even like I'm like that excited about the possibility. And maybe there is an actual beast in Lord of the Flies. I have no idea. But I'm assuming it's a figment of their imagination. And we can see how that goes. But yeah, I did not like this episode. And I would never ever have finished it had it not been a Patreon sponsored thing. I would have quit. I would have quit probably 15 minutes in and never reviewed it. But here I am. I wasn't allowed to do that, so yeah. Is it the worst thing ever? I don't think it's the worst thing ever, right? It's not like, I'm sure there's probably some audience for this, although the IMDb rating's pretty, it's not middling, it's like a 6 point something. It's okay. It's got an okay rating, so some people seem to think it's fine. But none of it's speaking to me. None of it. Tedious 56 minutes. Not looking forward to anymore. I'm sorry to say. But yeah, that's Lord of the Flies. Episode 1. Let me know what you thought of the episode if you've seen it in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Helps out a bunch if you can. And of course, if you want to support everything, you can do that over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep the content coming, both here and over in MailFuzz Movies. But that is me. So thank you for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?